Lawmakers in Arkansas passed a law requiring that state contractors not pledge to boycott Israel. So this is the BDS movement, which is of course controversial, considering the United States government and its undying, unyielding support for Israel. But states started passing certain laws that would punish individuals or companies if they signed on to the BDS movement. So in response to that, Arkansas decided, look, if you're getting any type of government contract, government money, state government particularly, and you are possibly pledging to boycott Israel, we're not cool with that. So we're gonna need you to sign a document indicating that you pledge not to boycott Israel. Now that ended up being controversial for a number of different reasons, because we're literally talking about the government punishing you for your speech, which seems to be a pretty clear violation of our First Amendment rights, regardless of how you feel about the BDS movement. And so this ended up making its way through the courts, and the big news today is the 8th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals has reversed a 2-1 decision last year by a 3-judge panel of the court that found the requirement to be unconstitutional. So let's pause for a second. That means they reversed the ruling indicating that the Arkansas law was unconstitutional. So now they're upholding that law, which means that the state of Arkansas can punish you by refusing to give you government contracts or any government money if you are practicing your political speech in being part of the boycott movement or the BDS movement. So here's more on why this case made it to the 8th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. It actually started with the Arkansas Times, a paper in the state that ended up being asked to sign that pledge, and they refused to do so.
The Times is Arkansas's left-leaning magazine. It's free. The publication survives on ad revenue. But this revenue stream is being threatened by a 2017 law that says state contractors have to sign a loyalty pledge to Israel.
Could you explain to me from the beginning how that happened?
One of our biggest advertisers and oldest advertisers is University of Arkansas, Pulaski Technical College. And so in November, the marketing people who we've worked with for years said, the purchasing director is requiring us to get you to sign this. And at first I just sort of lost it. And but this time it just kept coming. And finally I said, well, there's not going to be a signed pledge. See if I can find her. And then
the college buys ads in his paper with state money, making Leverett a state contractor.
You refused to sign it?
Yeah.
And what did that cost you?
Well, so far about $15,000.
$15,000, which might not seem like a lot of money for any type of organization, including a newspaper, except this makes up about 10% of their revenue. They receive 10% of their revenue through the state. And again, it's through various organizations who buy ads on the paper that appear on the paper, and they use state money in order to purchase those ads. So in this case, it was a university that typically would do advertising in this paper. So I wanna be clear that the paper does not support the BDS movement, but they also don't support the government punishing Americans for whatever political speech or any speech they engage in. They found that to be constitutional, which is why they took this to the courts. Now, as I mentioned, the appeals court has reversed a lower court decision which upholds this Arkansas law. The ACLU has noted that they will take this all the way to the Supreme Court, where unfortunately I'm not hopeful considering the ideological activism that we've been seeing so far from these conservative justices. Jessica, I wanted to get your thoughts on this.
It really feels like it's a deliberate decision to limit free speech when it comes to criticism of Israel specifically in our country. I wonder, would they have had the same ruling if this was about blocking people who want to boycott corporations in China? And I kind of feel like we wouldn't have seen this happen. And it's really weird to me to see like Arkansas and Israel in the same headline and have the Attorney General of Arkansas saying things like Israel's been an ally of ours. It's kind kind of like, you guys know each other? Like, why are you making decisions about this? And it's even weirder when you look at the appeals court's ruling, when they're saying, that this actually isn't an expression of, speech or political speech. This has to do with commercial activity, which, is under the purview of the states. And we're really states' rightsing our rights away. And to juxtapose this with, I think, Citizens United is super interesting, where they're saying that, hey, political spending from corporations and other groups is free speech. It's like, are you serious? We essentially have a political industrial complex where there's an industry around elections. This is not free speech. Is that commercial activity now too? Is this going to set a precedent that allows us to overturn Citizens United on this same rationale? It's insane to me that these two rulings can exist in the same justice system.
Well, what I'm actually very curious about is what happens if there is some lefty organization. I mean, I don't even know if this exists, but let's say a very well-to-do lefty organization that has some money to burn, and they decide to spend, who knows, an insane amount of money supporting an organization that helps to support the BDS movement, right? So can the state then punish that corporation? And if it does punish that corporation, how does the corporation only have, personhood and speech rights when it comes to corrupting a politician on pretty much every issue you could imagine, but it doesn't apply to this very specific issue? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So I'm curious to see how the Supreme Court, figures that out or squares that circle, whatever. We'll see how that plays out. But you mentioned some of the support, like what you've been hearing from individuals who have supported this Arkansas law. And I actually want to go to the next video because it features one of the state lawmakers who sponsored this legislation. And I think it's important to hear what his reasoning is. Let's watch.
It's hard to trace the origin of these anti-BDS laws, but they seem to be the result of coordination between lobby groups, some lawyers, and pro-Israel legislators like Bart Hester, State Senate Majority Leader, lifelong Republican, and dedicated Christian. He sponsored the Arkansas bill.
There are other states that have sponsored bills like this, and they're strikingly similar, almost word for word, like Texas, Louisiana, and I'm wondering basically who's behind authoring these bills.
No one came and pursued me to author this bill, but whenever you decide you're going to do it, you start researching what other states are doing, if it's working. You always, I like to check with groups like AIPAC, see what their thoughts are, and if they've got any what we call template legislation that seems to be working for them.
Yeah, that's sure, that's what happened, right? That he, out of nowhere, as a right-wing Christian in Arkansas, decided, hey, I'm curious about this BDS movement thing. Let me go talk to AIPAC. Let me go out of my way to talk to AIPAC. I'm researching this issue. No, AIPAC came to you. I mean, as they do, they engage in lobbying of lawmakers, both on a state and federal level. And that lobbying comes with, campaign donations, of course. That's how lobbying is done in this country. And the fact that they're so effective in convincing state lawmakers and now the federal courts that it's unacceptable to practice your political speech if it hurts the feelings of a foreign government that this country is incredibly supportive of. It's insane. The whole situation is insane.
Absolutely, absolutely insane. I mean, AIPAC is here exercising their First Amendment right of free speech with their money in politics, lobbying members of Congress at a local level, which is just, it's such an absurd situation, but you can't if you want to boycott Israel. And you're right that it actually doesn't really matter if you want to, think about this on a deeper level. It doesn't really matter if you support the BDS movement to see that this is a really dangerous precedent. But it's not really new for things like this to be happening in the United States. Like when South Africa was under an apartheid regime, the United States was supporting the government that was in power at the time for a very long time, when we had a ton of civil rights groups, calling for divestment from South Africa. And the regime there and the United Nations had condemned what was going on. And it took a really long time before our government came around and actually supported ending apartheid in South Africa. And we're kind of on a similar trajectory, I would say, with what's happening in Israel, where there are a lot of groups groups in the United States that are paying attention to what's happening there, and they want to speak up. And if you think back to what was going on in South Africa, and you think that of course you would condemn it, maybe you wouldn't if you think about where you are at with what's going on in Israel. And I think it's interesting to look at the parallels with that political movement, what was going on at the time, and when the United States eventually came around. And it's really going to take getting money out of politics to have more people understand what's happening with the apartheid in Palestine by Israel.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Just two more things I want to mention, and then we'll wrap this up. Let's go to graphic 2 here, because Judge Jonathan Kobes, who's with the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, explained his reasoning here for upholding that Arkansas law. The law only prohibits economic decisions that discriminate against Israel because those commercial decisions are invisible to observers unless explained. They are not inherently expressive and do not implicate the First Amendment, which I think is a ridiculous line of thinking. It's ridiculous rationale for this, decision to uphold the law. And I want to just go to what the First Amendment specifically says. What is the wording in the First Amendment? You need to know what it says in order to really evaluate that line of thinking from that Circuit Court of Appeals judge. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. I don't know about you, Jessica, but I've read that over and over again to see if there are any exceptions, particularly exceptions pertaining to whether or not your speech is public enough. Apparently, our free speech isn't really free unless we're shouting it from the rooftops. It's insane.
Yeah, the way they've been writing these bills, I think about the Don't Say Gay bill as well, where it's just vague enough that it can apply in every scenario. You can argue that this law applies in every scenario. And we've even seen that start in Florida, where they say, you can't talk about, LGBTQ issues in grades, K through 3rd grade or whatever it was, or other ages where it's deemed inappropriate. Who's to say what's inappropriate? That should be in the law. It should be very specific. Instead, it's subjective, so they can apply this law at will.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.